We've just had the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, 17 years on the throne. And obviously a lot of jokes could be made about it and sort of critical things about how rich they are and so on and so forth. But the monarchy plays a key role within the political system in Britain. And it's important to look at that aspect as well as all the other class aspects of the role of the royal family. So that's why we thought on the back of the Jubilee, we should have a discussion on the royal family and the role of monarchy.
Yeah, so when I first kind of had a look at talking about how the role of the monarchy works, it's a relatively simple subject in my mind, and I think in a lot of other socialist minds. But in the role of how the worker perceives the monarchy, I think it then becomes a relatively quite complex subject. I think as socialists, we tend to view the monarchy as a very sort of morally bankrupt institution. And I would happen to agree with this. But I do think sometimes there is a bit of a miss when it comes to a sort of a more scientific approach to how the monarchy work, how the monarchy operate, how they're structured. And I think as socialists, we need to be pretty clear on our position of the monarchy, how we engage with workers about the political corruption, money, power that they hold over us. We should question and choose how we engage with the working class while still holding our integrity to those who may oppose our views. I'm not going to focus too much necessarily in the historical lineages of the monarchy whilst giving this contribution, because I don't think it's necessarily that important to the arguments, although their role in colonialism will often come up as a sign of their power. But I choose to take a bit more of a sort of a contemporary material approach, especially in their economy and their influence of power within the state. I'm open to engaging with those in this meeting. Now, I'm going to assume, pretty much all of us, that we are probably looking of the ideas of abolishment of the monarchy, but there may be some people here who might show some, at least, sympathy towards the monarchy. I would be surprised, but if there are, I would be open to having that conversation as well. I don't want people to necessarily shy away from having that conversation and understanding workers who may have certain sympathies with the monarchy, because I think it's helpful to have that debate and understand actually where people come from when they speak. Because as I said, for most of my life, for most I know of my friends, family, especially young people, we don't have that kind of support for the monarchy. So anyone who may have supported the monarchy in the past as well, do give me some questions or some responses. So the Jubilee, just starting off at that point, I think a very farcical event that I think gave credence to a tired monarchy that is sort of not fit for purpose in the 21st century. According to the Times, I was reading recently that Rishi Sunak apparently held money, 28 million, for the festivities. It was primarily held to sort of revamp venues such as village halls and obtain sort of commemorative books for children about the royals. Each book sort of cost around £3 per child per head. They really wanted to focus in on that statistic. But of course, we should point out that when the government decided in 2020 that they would not allow free school meals for disadvantaged pupils and then proceeded to do a bit of a U-turn on it, that scheme ended up costing £20 million. So it's this kind of money that's wasted on the monarchy and gives way instead and less for kind of more desperate situations, especially that workers and young people are facing at the moment. And another important point about the Jubilee is that there was an impact assessment by the Department of Culture, Media and Sport that said that the Jubilee would cost the economy a staggering £2.39 billion. When workers are going through a cost of living crisis, a food crisis, exorbitant rent for young people, and mortgages and a wage squeeze due to rising inflation, the government instead tried to splash out on the cash on tired old relics from a bygone era. And the monarchy did not need this event. The Jubilee was kind of used as a sort of a celebration and opium for people. But ultimately, I think that a lot of people either maybe tended to not celebrate it. Again, we can have that discussion. You lot may have seen more than I did. But I think people are more worried at the moment about the cost of living crisis than particularly anything else. But the Jubilee is just one of many costly affairs with the royals. The royals have held some of the most significant assets in this country. The Crown's estate holds one of the largest property portfolios in the United Kingdom, and apparently it has holdings of £7.3 billion. Now, this was an old figure from 2011. They haven't actually released any modern figures, but there are some estimates that sort of royals and historians of kind of royalists, that they said that it's apparently doubled in its holdings since then. So probably around 14 to 15 billion. And most of these properties are constantly maintained and refurbished each year through the sovereign grant, which is paid annually by the Treasury to fund official duties, though there are other forms of money that go through that. And again, more waste for people who don't really produce any work or any substantial contribution to society, in my arguments. Now, that sovereign fund that I was talking about, it was increased from 15% to 25% in 2016 to ensure that renovations to Buckingham Palace could occur, even though that actually most royals don't live in most of these crown estates. And of course, they end up taking it for their private wealth. But it's estimated they receive an average of 44 million per year from this sovereign grant. So that's another whack of money that comes up. And then they also own things very kind of, the best way I can describe it is sort of petty bourgeois, I guess. But, very like royal collections of arts, 7,000 paintings, and a collection of 40,000 drawings that's up in the Tower of London that never gets seen or used by anyone. And the royals sit on a massive wealth of unused assets, and the money is wasted on refurbishment without anyone seeing or using these assets. Now, Queen Elizabeth II, the Majesty herself, has a private investment portfolio, but there are laws to ensure that she cannot reveal it. She's often put in laws to the government, and this was revealed in The Guardian, I think, a couple of years ago, that she's actually actively tried to put in laws in place to stop any revealing of how much tax she pays, trying to hide that. But there's some estimation that her private wealth is sort of around 365 million. Now, there's certain arguments that whether she's in the top 1%, the top 5%, let's just say that she is in the top percentage bracket. And the monarch is a drain on our public resources. If workers truly understood the amount of money wasted on them, there may start to be a change. And I think already there is a shift happening, especially from 10 years ago, that this passivity towards the monarchy is starting to falter. But nevertheless, it's not only an economic issue that the royals have. They also have a lot of constitutional control, far more than what I think people realize. We live in what is considered, and I'm sure most of you know this, but a constitutional monarchy, where there's sort of a hereditary monarchy that is the head of state. But it's more of according to royalists, considered more a spiritual state than actually any sort of real tangible politics that's involved. And then, of course, you've got the absolute monarchy, which is where king or queen will have a true source of political power. Now, I tend to like to take this quote from Walter Bagehot, which says, "The Queen reigns, but she does not rule." I think the fact of the matter is that statement is truly not valid. Because if the government, say, were to pass a bill that the monarchy did not accept, they could refuse it and not give what we call royal assent. It is a power used to accept bills, formally sort of enter new prime ministers. Queen's speech is a part of this. And that means if they refuse the royal assent, the government would probably have to resign, try and form a new government to pass a bill. It becomes an absolute constitutional crisis. It also shows that the monarchy just have so many powers over our laws and legislators that can direct a country in any way that they choose. Our heads of state often suggest that we live in one of the most robust democracies in the world, one of the most liberal democracies in the world. But if that were true, the monarchy would not have the power to do these things. Another power that they have is called crown privilege. which gives the Crown power to withhold documentary evidence from any court. In Britain, there is no written constitution. It's based on the Parliamentary Statute and Convention and more judicial decisions. Again, another way in which they can hide their money, hide what their income is. Now, I would say it's also no accident that the Queen is sort of regarded as above politics, which a lot of the time these royalist pundits you see on the TV often refer, oh, she's above all that. She doesn't talk about these things. She's sort of anointed with a sort of an aura of mystique. And supposedly that represents sort of a nation. Part of this is where the armed forces come in which they swear their allegiance to the Crown, not just Parliament. The Crown has prerogative power to direct the use of troops. Armed forces are responsible to the Crown under the Queen's regulations. It's called the Incitement of Disaffection Act of 1934. And it's illegal to seduce a soldier from their duty and allegiance to the Crown. Now, there's a manual military law that defines 5 situations in which the military may be called to aid civil powers. And I'm not going to go through every single one, but there is one that I think is very important, which is Act 5, which is where there is an insurrection. Now, the manual defines the last category, an insurrection as involving an intention to levy war against the Queen, as it's technically called, or otherwise to act in general defiance of the country's government. So, in other words, the military must act in these situations. If there was ever a coup or any sort of challenge towards the monarchy, the state would use that power, military power, and the royals, and the monarchy would use it to defend its powers. And that's something, as socialists, we must argue against. They also use their power to defend their criminal intent. Of course, a lot has been said in the press about Prince Andrew and his close relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Again, I'm not going down that path, even though it's pretty obvious as to what kind of corruption goes on there. I'm just, it's all part of the same game of their political power and corruption. And Prince Andrew, I think today it was revealed that he's been blocked from duties as kind of a disassociation with the royals. But the royals have allowed this kind of behavior to go on for a long time, and not just with family members, but also with friends as well. And there is one other, I would say, elephant in the room for the royals, and that is the institution of colonialism. And again, we would have to go through a historical lineage in order to really explain the damage colonialism has done around the world, not even just the UK itself. But the British monarchy was central to this establishment, its expansion and maintenance of the British Empire, and what we know now, or what we are considering now, although Tories are often trying to block this kind of education, which is the transatlantic slave trade. And one of the big areas I would say that they have most of their power and still hold this power today is through their mindset. It's the mindset that has persisted. You know, the casual racism of both Prince Charles, Prince Philip, mainly in the countries they've colonized. One of those countries, Australia, in 2002, and I read this kind of verbatim, is that he asked an Aboriginal Australian if they were still throwing spears. Not a long time ago in which he was saying things like this. In 1999, he sort of mused an old-fashioned fuse box and said it must have been put in by an Indian. So again, Australia, India, he also made some comments about China. It's just some of those countries that have just been touched by British colonization. And I think colonialism by the British Empire, by the monarchy, is this old feudal relic that's held these countries back. I do have a slightly more maybe controversial opinion, but I'll explain my reasonings for it, is that often you get a lot of, quite a bit of the left say that reparations are the right way to go. Whilst I'm not completely, I'm not a fence sitter, but I'm not so for the idea, because I think ultimately reparations often mean that we then accept, they can wash their hands away with it and then go, all right, we've apologized, we've paid, that's it. And I'd say, no, we got to go further. There's only one demand that we should make, and that is the abolishment of the monarchy. But how do we make that argument to workers? It's quite a tall order. In a recent YouGov poll as part of the Jubilee celebrations, 6 in 10 Britons, 62%, think that Britain should continue to have a monarchy in the future, with only 22% saying the country should move to an elected head of state instead. Labour voters and young voters, I think, is where it makes the difference. And I think this will be the fundamental change that we see for the future, is that the Labour voters are 48% in favour of a monarchy and 37% in a head of state. I would actually, when I read that statistic, I thought it would be more for having a head of state, but clearly there's a lot of there are people in the Labour Party that I think sometimes quite backwards themselves when they focus on the monarchy. Now, here's where it's more important, which I think is young people, is that young people, 33% are in favour of a monarchy and 31% are for a head of state. So almost to the split there. Still a little bit more support for the monarchy by, 2%? But I think over the years that will change. It should also be important about the question's quite important with that statistic as well, is that do you think we should have a monarchy that can continue for the future? Most people, and even in my apolitical days when I was a lot younger, I would often say, yeah, sure, why not? Because they don't actually have necessarily, or to what I thought, much of an impact on my life, because often we either just praise the monarchy or never talk about it. But actually what we're finding is that more and more each day with these controversies, with expenditure, with social media, internet has played a bit of a part of this as well, calling out the hypocrisies of the royals. We're starting to see, I think, a little bit of a challenge to the status quo of the monarchy, especially with young people. And I think it'll become more accessible through time. I think people will start to shift their ideas. Whilst most Britons have been consistently in favour of continuing the monarchy, there has been a decline over the last decade. So it was 75% back in July 2012, and now we're seeing 62% now. There is a slight growing, if not angst and the complacency, I think, to the monarchy. But it's starting to chip away bit by bit, especially, again, with scandals and so on. And I like to say this quite a lot, but conditions determine consciousness. And I think that's the reality that we're probably seeing here. There's a period of turmoil that's about to happen, and we're already experiencing a possible recession. I think an inevitable recession on the cards, high inflation, again, cost of living crisis, shrinking wages was spoken about today, climate carnage. I think workers will not only just start to think about how the monarchy works in our society, mainly more to do with the state, but also how the monarchy almost prop up the state in a lot of ways through accepting bills that have no resonance for workers, that do not support workers in any way. I think the time will come, but I don't think it's in the absolute present when the monarchy's authority will be challenged. Now, I don't think we cannot be honest, cannot be dishonest in our intentions as socialists. We do not play to the patriotism of the current Labour Party, the flag waving, the Union Jacks. I know Starmer recently put an article out in the Daily Telegraph saying we should all be patriotic and so on. I don't think we should do that. We should be challenging the role of the monarchy with workers. But I think we do have to pick and choose our fights. At this moment, workers are, sort of faced with the crisis of capitalism. And I think at this point, again, changing into the future, I don't think they're there to seek the dismantling of the monarchy right now, as they think it serves no immediate purpose to them. So I think discussing issues of the day in local trade union branches and Labour Party meetings, I think, is essential. But it does not stop us from questioning the monarchy's role. And I think especially with the more advanced sections of the working class, we can ask them, what purpose do they serve? Why are they allowed to hold such positions of power that do nothing to help us? These questions, I think, will resonate with workers and may change minds about the role of the monarchy. Again, you've got to really pick and choose those fights, but I think those fights are important. And I'd say especially with young people, because young people resonate with that a lot more. And them being split about the monarchy's role, because they see almost every institution are oppressing them now, of course, including the Tories. And I think that engagement with young workers will be paramount to sort of this fundamental shift in society where one day we'll hopefully see the monarchy's role abolished once and for all. So I'm curious to ask comrades, as I sort of wrap up to the end of this, is how do you think we should engage with workers? What role should socialists play in this process? And whether there is such an importance of removing the monarchy in the present. Do you think that dormant workers will not necessarily be interested in those ideas? Or have you had those conversations? Has there been some resonance? I'm sort of interested to hear your thoughts. And yes, thank you very much for listening.
Obviously in Northern Ireland, Joe says the thing becomes complicated once you try explaining it to workers, and this is one place where it is complicated. It is recognised that the Queen is the head of the Church of England, which is the Church of England in Ireland, called the Church of Ireland, which is the biggest Protestant church here. Without getting into all the history of this place, there are now socialists. I hardly ever hear a socialist saying this, but there are two monarchies working in this place. One of them is the Catholic Church. It is a monarchy. Protestants in Northern Ireland don't want is to be ruled by that other monarchy. That's why they wanted partition, and they have this part of Ireland. And the only way to secure it was to remain part of Britain. So there's those two connections. Don't want to be part of that, so we have to have something that will secure our separation. And the other one is we want to be part of the Church of England, and the Queen's ahead of that, and that's where all the monarchy comes in. But if you ignore, if you talk to Protestant workers here and ignore that reality in their identity, you're on a hiding to nothing. You'll get nowhere. Even the Republicans recognise that, which is why you saw the images of Martin McGuinness shaking hands with the Queen. They recognise that you can't ignore that. Gerry Adams wrote about it in his books and all, about how you can't ignore it. It's very difficult here. I can't understand why there's so much support among Labour Party members in England for the monarchy. It doesn't make any sense to me. But here it does make some sense, I don't know if anybody understands what I'm trying to get at here. It's doubly difficult for us to talk to workers about.
And to talk about why do I think people that are otherwise lefties, and there's a very famous sort of, if you like, somebody on Facebook, somebody who's involved in a lot of the anti-witch hunt material, who actually lives in Windsor, believe it or not, who I was astonished to see throughout the whole of the Blackness. She was out there in fancy dress with her nails painted in Union Jack colours. I mean, she's a hardline Corbynista activist, active in Labour against the witch hunt and so on and so forth. And yet she's lost her marbles when it came to the royalty. And we have to seriously understand as to why this is. I think part of it, during the Platinum Jubilee weekend, apart from the fact that it was my birthday, which took my brain off it anyway, I was very careful. I think I didn't put anything on Facebook or any of my social media about it, saying how great it was. But also I didn't come in and rain everybody's parade. If somebody was organising a street party, I didn't say, "Boo-hoo, you idiots." Because people were doing it for all sorts of reasons. And I think we need to avoid coming across as just miserable gits, really. There's something about just being, if somebody wants to organise a street party, yeah, some of them might be royalists, some of them might not be. I don't think it's our job to promote it, but I don't think it's our job either to go up and down the street sort of, raining on their parade necessarily. And I think we have to understand why people like it. Now, Joe's absolutely correct. I think people don't see the monarchy as any political role. They see it as soap opera. They see it as glamour. They see it as nice, beautiful dresses and handsome guys and fun young men who lost their mum, da-di-da. There's this whole kind of story, this narrative. They see it in purely soap opera, family terms. And the old lady who's been very brave and her husband died and da-di-da-di-da-di-da. That's where most of the support comes from. I don't think there's any real support, any sort of constitutional role necessarily. And what we also have to realise is that people also have they do have a keen sense of history. They see it's been going on for, this family has been going on for 1,500 years. There is a sense in which people just don't want to have that between that tradition. They like the idea of it continuing, I think. I'm not saying I agree with it, I'm just saying that's what people think. I don't think it's particularly useful. I've seen on Facebook, and I talk to people, there's a kind of a real miserable, let's just take all their, let's put them in a council house in Liverpool, let's put them in a council house in a dodgy part of Barnsley, take all their wealth away. I don't think there's any sort of appetite in the country to punish the royal family in any kind of. I don't think we're going to get a sort of a Bolshevik, stick them in the basement and get machine guns out. I don't think there's any kind of appetite for that kind of thing. And I think it turns people off. There's a certain kind of liking for the family as a family, even though some of them are clearly dysfunctional. And I would say one of our strongest arguments actually against it, we should end it for them. Growing up in this hideous family would just be unbearable for me. I couldn't tolerate it for a second. I just couldn't. There was a thing about the kid, what his name, George, the little kid. I think, my God, that kid's life is mapped out for him. He's got no freedom at all to decide what he wants to do. There's a certain sense in which it's ruining their own lives. And I think that should be pointed out. But we shouldn't also ignore the fact that people in this country really, really hate elected politicians. And I think saying get rid of the Queen and have elected politicians doesn't cut ice often with working people, because they hate politicians more than they hate the Queen. They don't see politicians as their representatives. They see politicians as just, posh scumbags who have got very different ways of making life a misery. They see the Labour Party as kind of, well, all right, I suppose, better than the Tories, but no, not that good. So there was a sense in which boosting elected heads of state and even elected lords and so on, people don't really, so a lot of the lower levels of working class people, the more backward working class people, they don't see it as attractive because they hate politicians as much. A lot of people voted, like in the northeast, people voted against the devolved assembly in the northeast of England because people thought, oh God, it's just another a big council of 70 odd politicians. We got too many politicians as it is. There is that feeling. And I think there's a sense in which a republic is not seen as more beneficial in people's daily lives to a monarchy. Now, I think we can argue that case. And I think where we need to go in is not talking about how much they cost, because, we can get into it, how much they cost is one issue of it. But I don't think that's the main issue. I think what we have to say, and it's not a matter of personal issue about how nice or not nice they are. I don't think that's the issue at all. How bad their characters are, how good their characters are. I think the issue is the power they have, and Joe was absolutely correct to point this out. The power they have, the secret power they have, not to refuse to sign bills that are passed. They wouldn't risk that constitutional crisis. What they do, they're able to get in to stop bills before they're put to the House. They're able to secretly stop bills from even being presented to the House. That's the secret power they have. And more than that, constitutionally, we haven't got a constitution. Constitutionally, we're an absolute monarchy, actually. And so massive amount of power and patronage are in the hands of the monarch. But of course, they're not in the hands of the monarch. So all that power and patronage devolves into the hands of the Prime Minister. It makes the British Prime Minister one of the most powerful politicians inside this country of any politician in Europe or America or any of the leading sort of Western nations, because there are no checks and balances. The Prime Minister actually, through the Crown prerogative, the Prime Minister actually just soaks up the power that the Queen would have if it were an absolute monarchy, if you get what I mean. So we have to sort of talk about limiting that power and having like a constitution. Now, I would say I'm not going to argue, go out up down the streets arguing for like a presidential system as in France, Germany or America necessarily rather than the monarchy. What we should be arguing for is full, proper workers' democracy. Of course, there'd be no monarchy in a workers' democracy. It's a laughable, the idea of it is ridiculous. But I think we should be arguing for proper, serious democracy, real workers' state democracy. And I think that would, in the course of all that, it would obviously preclude there being a monarchy. But I don't think there's no real appetite for having just more corrupt bourgeois politicians.
I always remember my late parents used to say, well, the Queen's all right, but it's all those hangers-on. It's all of the extended royal family. And if I've heard that once from ordinary workers, I've heard it 100 times. And I think, we have to think of how we as Labour Party activists and socialists deal with that attitude. Because I think Ray's right. I think people in relatively humdrum lives, faced with insecurities, faced with kind of monotony and routine every day of their lives, like a bit of spectacle, like parades and a bit of pomp. It doesn't have to come from the monarchy, I know. So I think it's important that we approach it in a measured way. I think what Joe was absolutely right insofar as he pinpointed the two issues around the monarchy. One is the wealth, the fact that they're fabulously wealthy. I mean, Prince Charles hasn't done a stroke, and by a pure accident of birth, he's one of the richest people in the country. He owns half of Cornwall and all this sort of stuff. And if you look at all the other earls and dukes and all the rest of it, there's a huge amount of wealth there. So there's that aspect of it. But the other aspect is also important, and that is the reserve political power. It appears that the monarchy doesn't use its political power, but the fact that the police, the army, the civil service, the judiciary, the church, all of these things give their loyalty to the monarchy. In a critical situation, if there was a conflict between an elected radical government and the establishment, we know which side the monarchy would be on. So it's a reserve power. It's a reserve power to act as a barrier against any kind of socialist government. All of those things that Joe said, all of those things are correct. I think that as activists, we have to approach it in a measured way, in a careful way. Apart from anything else, I was listening to what Mick said. Apart from anything else, a word like Republican has completely different connotations nowadays because of the history of the troubles in Northern Ireland. If I was standing as a parliamentary candidate, in my leaflets and in my propaganda and in my public meetings, I probably wouldn't mention the monarchy. I would talk about wages, I would talk about housing, I would talk about the NHS, I would talk about living standards, and that would be where all of my emphasis would lie, on fighting for material improvements in the day-to-day lives of working class people. I always remember, I can't remember whether it was Pat Wall or Terry Fields, but one of those MPs being interviewed, and this interviewer was trying to get him to say, well, where do you stand on the monarchy? What's your view on the monarchy? And the response was really good. It was really good. As I say, I can't remember if it was Pat Wall or Terry Fields, but it stuck in my mind how he replied. He said, it's not an issue. And the interviewer said, no, how do you stand on the monarchy? And he said, it's not an issue. You're trying to avoid a discussion on wages, jobs, unemployment, housing, and all the important things by getting me to talk about something that's not important. And I think, I think that's the way we would approach it. I was thinking, I know it's a kind of a funny kind of scenario. You think these things through, but I was thinking during the Jubilee, how would I reply to somebody who said to me, what do you think about the Queen? Say in a public meeting, I was having a public meeting with the Labour Party and somebody said, what do you think of the Queen? I would say, well, millions and millions of people admire the Queen and respect the Queen, and think that she's done a lot for the country. But there are important issues around the monarchy and about the political powers of the monarchy that need to be addressed. And that's how I would deal with it. I wouldn't come, hobnail boots saying, oh, she's a wicked old witch or something like that, because it would fall flat. Now, the points that Joe made, I think, are all very important points. And we make similar points from time to time in articles on our website. But the experience of understanding those things, understanding the reserved political role of the monarchy, is not something that British workers have yet come up against, but I think they will. 40 years ago in Australia, when the Queen's representative was actively involved in getting rid of a Labour MP, a Labour Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, that produced a massive discussion in Australia about the monarchy. And if I'm not mistaken, there may even have been a referendum on the question. I can't remember now. It was a long time ago, but it provoked a massive discussion. Now, if you had a situation in this country where the Queen refused, or Prince Charles or King Charles refused to give royal assent to a radical reforming bill, then that would produce the same kind of political crisis, and that would produce a scenario in which you could discuss the role of the monarchy and things like that. But that's not there yet. Unfortunately, that's not where we are now. So I think, I think a lot of I agree with the points that Joe's raised about the analysis of what the monarchy is, but I also think that we should approach it in a measured way and not in a clumsy and cack-handed way.
Yeah, I was going to make the point that John just made about the role of the monarch in the dismissal of the Gough Whitlam government in Australia, and I think certainly, although as Ray has pointed out in the chat, the referendum in Australia voted to keep the monarchy, but only by a slim majority. But I think it is certainly not a question of a constitutional crisis with the monarch at the moment. Certainly not the same events as occurred with the removal of the monarchy in France during the French Revolution, or in Russia during the Russian Revolution. We're not in that period at the moment, but it's important to point to the examples, such as in Australia in 1975, to the constitutional powers that the monarch has. And I think that's something that we do need to keep in our propaganda, and something that I think other ruling classes have been, such as in the Netherlands, for example, the constitutional powers were taken away from the monarchy in the Netherlands. But I think one of the things that could cause certainly a breakup of the Commonwealth, which we've seen recently in Barbados. They've voted to remove the constitutional role of the monarchy, will be the death of the Queen, which is obviously imminent within the next few years, and the ascension of Charles III. And certainly with all the scandals surrounding the monarchy in regard to Prince Andrew and his payoff to avoid court proceedings on charges of paedophilia, and also the situation with regard to Harry and Meghan. I think all of these things lead to a crisis within that is facing the new monarch, which will be imposed upon us in the next few years. I think Ray mentioned that there's a lot of people who revere tradition. And certainly I think that's probably the case with the Queen, but certainly wouldn't be the case for Charles III, unless, of course, we're referring to the tradition of the Charles I and the emulation of his demise, which, of course, was in the events of the English Revolution.
Events can take a turn. I'm thinking of the Diana events, which was certainly, it shook Britain at the time. I can remember as a bus driver hearing people having quite deep discussions about what they thought of the Queen. One lady saying she was a cold woman, another one piped up and said, "No, still in defence of the royals." And I found it all quite strange, but there was discussions, debates taking place on buses. I remember that because I would hear them during those events. And as a supporter of socialist appeal at the time, it generally thought there was an opportunity for the Labour movement to sweep the monarchy aside. Whether that was the case or not, I'm not certain, but that was the general view. Blair saved the monarchy in a sense, because there are pictures seeing her crying about the loss of her yacht, yet there's no tears shed for the death of her daughter-in-law. So these are the sort of things that which change people's consciousness. The mob they had to fly the flag, didn't they, from Buck Palace a half-mast, which is only reserved normally for the death of a reigning monarch, and it had a big impact. If I recall, it was the bestseller the Socialist Appeal ever had. Was a pamphlet by Alan Woods. Whether the conclusions are entirely correct, I'm not certain about, but that was our bestseller. And so events can take a turn, quite a quick turn. I mean, Prince Andrew. I don't know whether the song did get to number one. Some sort of joke, like with I can always remember Sex Pistols had a number one. It was banned off the airwaves. God save the Queen, wasn't it? So there's that sort of anti-monarchist mood, particularly amongst the youth, that we can tap into. So I don't think it's entirely correct. We should have articles criticising the monarchy. The YS always got a bit of mention in the mass media because it would stand out and say they would support the abolition of the monarchy. Actually, my memory of Labour movement activists is they're not supportive of the monarchy. The old-style right-wingers, when I first, weren't enthusiastic. They saw it as a vote loser. No, don't go there because we lose votes. there wasn't any enthusiasm amongst Labour's rank and file, with my memory, and even within the trade union movement. So events can change things quite rapidly, as events around the Diana thing showed to me. Anyway, that's my point.
My couple of points. It seems to me, especially in this part of London where I'm living, and lived all my life, that it's definitely the older people that support the royal family more than the younger ones. The only real younger ones who do support the royal family and the Queen are the fascists and the real right wingers. But the younger ones really are not interested in them, and they're quite bored with it. But with the older ones, the Queen's always been there. She's always been there all my life as well, since I was a baby. She's always been there. And so I care about the Queen as much as she cares about me. This personal feeling goes on for the older people. And they keep saying one of these things they come out with, she brings a lot of tourism money into the country. But I point out to them the other week during the Jubilee, all the airports was in chaos with people, millions of people trying to get out of the country because the planes couldn't get them out of the country fast enough to get away from it, which shuts them up a little bit about it. And also there was a party near around there, and they were handing out leaflets for the Jubilee party. And what was on the leaflet was a picture of the Sex Pistols LP, Never Mind the Bollocks. And it was called Never Mind the Jubilee, Let's Have a Party. So it was just having a party, not to celebrate the Jubilee, as someone made a point earlier about that. There's all this kind of thing going on. And when it comes also, of course, when was mentioned the Australian referendum, my memory of that as well is that the referendum failed to vote out the monarchy because most of the people didn't like what the alternative was put to them. If there had been a better alternative, a more clearer alternative, they may well have won it, but it didn't happen. And this money situation is a real, and Prince Andrew's probably the biggest recruiter for republicanism we've had for a long time. And the money thing, the money, it should be emphasised, their wealth. They won the lottery the day they were born, these people. And you have to say that to people, and it registers. Anyway, that's all I've got to say.
Joe said that there might be people in the audience tonight who supported or support the Royals. Well, here's a story, Joe. When I was 8, the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh came up to Tyneside to open up a new technical college. And as they were driving past, waving at everybody, and all the schools and gates that had been given the day off and given a flag to wave for Her Majesty, I was waving the flag along with my mum, who at the time was in the Communist Party, but had to be there because I was only 8. And on the way back home, walking back home, I said to my mum that I wanted to marry the Queen. And from that day on, I was the bloody laughing stock of the family. But never mind. So there's my little story out there for anybody to hit us over the head with in years to come. There's been I don't know what you would call them. They're not celebrations about Grenfell, but there's been a remembrance about Grenfell 5 years ago when 72 people died in a council built block of flats because there was illegal cladding put on them in the inquiry, and the inquiry still going on 5 years later. People in the inquiry were given get out of jail cards if they were to tell the truth. Presumably, the consensus was that no fucker was going to tell the truth. But at any rate, some of them took the get out of jail cards and wouldn't, and the agreement was they wouldn't be prosecuted for confirming that everybody knew that it was illegal cladding, confirming that 72 people had been killed because of greed. Now imagine the situation if there'd been a job of work done on one of the palaces and it had caught alight and several royals had been burned to death. What would have happened? What would have been the reaction the police, the government, the Labour Party, people would be in jail now and they'd be serving years of 20 years, 10 to 20 years in prison. And I think we should be making those comparisons. In a period unheard of poverty for millions and millions and millions of people in this country, we should be telling people how much the royals have, what their annual income is, what their billions of pounds are, where the land they own. We should be telling people how many rooms there are in all of the palaces and all of the huge houses that have been specially built for all the princes and all the princesses. And the fact that it would solve homelessness in London overnight, can anybody do with 400 rooms in a palace called Buckingham Palace? In fact, it's more than 400. I just can't exactly remember how many. And I also think we should be making comparisons like that. And I mean, not in the middle of a conversation about is England going to win the Hungary match tonight. You don't jump in and say, what about the fucking rooms that are in Buckingham Palace and stuff like that. But we will and we do get opportunities all of the time to raise the issue of the wealth that they have, and it's unearned wealth. And some people are working 3 jobs and they can't put more than 10 gallons in their car to carry on working. And I think we've never had a better opportunity in my life. I've never had a better opportunity to raise the issue of the monarchy, unearned wealth, patronage. I think it was the lad from London who said the day they're born, they've won the lottery. What a good, I'm not going to forget that. That's a good argument and a good point to make. I just think at this moment in time, when people can't afford a bus fare to go to a food bank, we should be telling people that the royal family have billions and billions of pounds, and we should be taxing them, and we should be using that wealth that we get off them through tax, pay for school meals, for free school meals for all kids in the country so that they don't go hungry. And I think that's the best argument that we can mount against the royal family, is the disparity in wealth, the disparity in luxury, the disparity in the way in which they're treated, as opposed to 72 council house tenants. When it comes to safety, when it comes to the safety of the homes, I just think the whole situation's untenable, and we've got opportunities now to get that message across.
Comrades have made some points here about their own personal stories of times past, and it's great that you hear that, because it's a collection of your thoughts and the way it was and where we are now. The points it's raised, raised the monarchy at all. I mean, if it gets raised, I mean, obviously in an organised meeting like this, obviously you're going to discuss it. But I mean, like, in general, the general feeling this is, well, you've only got to see the FA Cup final. I mean, no one knows what happened at the FA Cup final. I mean, when the Royals stepped onto the pitch, it was just whistling and booing and what have you. Now, every weekend and every week, certainly the weekends, even when a game's not on, there's hundreds that are in Liverpool, and the connection between Ireland and Liverpool, it's not that far away, historically as well as geographically. I understand and I appreciate what Mick was saying there, because I was writing the names down and telling what Mick was saying from Northern Ireland. I appreciate that. But I'd say this, them travelling fans and them people that travel over to Liverpool, not just to watch games, by the way, to shop, to stay over, meet family, friends and whatever, this obviously will have an effect, because they would be standing amongst people and maybe not, like what Mick was saying, understanding the background there, and would find themselves in that environment where this is happening. And I'm not saying that would follow on from that, there would be discussion, but it certainly would stay with people. But also it has a connection in melting things down. I mean, people talk about a republic. I've seen something get put up by John Pickard, the republic in France, 150 years. It's a republic in America as well, since 1776, if that man serves me right. But a few years back, I went up Comrades and see this. This is something I never printed, not something that I thought of. And there's thousands of these in Liverpool, and it's the republic or whatever. It's a statement. It's a statement that's being made. And as far as like I mean, just a throwaway line. Like, I mean, people didn't want to see the monarchy under threats and stuff on and so forth. I mean, I think the last place you'd want to keep them safe is selling to Liverpool, to be quite honest. And and I think what people have to do, and I'm not doing this, by the way, is try to reflect of what the mood is amongst the people. I mean, when they talk about the question, democratic workers' control and all the rest of it, right? Well, that's a great way, yeah. Well, in the Constitution of the Spirit of Shankly, which is a fans' organisation, and it's socialist in its ways, because in its constitution, it's like, in the meantime, in its transitional programme, we are where we're at. But the bottom line, it says we want to run the club, and we want to run it, and that's a statement in itself, and that runs deep, and it's trying to keep it together. The monarchy, I mean, it's commonly known as Betty Battenberg here, Queen Elizabeth. A point was made. I think it was John that made it. He's heard it 100 times, or maybe, I don't know, about the Queen and she's all right and all the rest of it. I think there's a strong more feeling for that. But I think anyone that's behind it, I think it's a different kettle of fish. See, one of the things that we've got to remember, someone said, oh, well, I don't want to get into this. The fact of it is that some of us are parents, some of us are grandparents, and some of us are lucky enough to be great-grandparents. And the last thing if you think about it, you attack the family. And what I mean by attack the family, you attack a child in a family and you are a paedophile or recognised as a paedophile. That don't sit well amongst working class people. Doesn't sit well at all. And this payout of the 12 million, has gone down like a lead balloon. When it comes on to, the question of Harry and Meghan, well, we all know, they had a freebie. Well, they've always had freebies. They had a big one before they got up to America. This is not lost on people, It's things like this that strike into people deeper. These questions of what the monarchy's value, of what they're worth, and all the rest of it. I think as time moves on, and it's moving pretty quick, I think the accumulation of wealth, who's holding what, and what's going down in society, I think that's going to be a sticking point. And the other point I got onto as well was the fact of the comrade that I think it was Mark, the bus driver or ex-bus driver, was saying about Princess Diana. Whether we like the royals or whether we don't, the way they handle that and the way that she was seen, the setup, if you like, for her to have this child so he could have his thing with doesn't go down well at all. These are things that really, really, well, if you had it in your family, you'd either ask them to go and see a psychiatrist, or you'd have to go and see one yourself. That's the way that I would say it. I mean, I would certainly, if it was one of mine, any of them, twin brother, anything, I'd drum them out, never be seen again. But like someone said, this is the game they play. This is the way it works. The part of the ruling class, these games go on. Public schools, private schools, you should say, nannies and all the rest of it, and all the crap that goes on with that, and these are our rulers. And I just think, time's running out for them pretty quickly. I think so.
Jubilee celebrations, when they referred to the oath that the Queen had given when she, in the coronation. And what struck me, and it speaks to the point that Mick raised, one of the things she made in a point was like a commitment to maintain the Reformed Protestant Church established by law. There was no mention of other religions. And it'd be really interesting to see if the next coronation, whether that sort of oath is different and reflects the sort of multicultural nature of, and the supposedly secular, Britain is supposedly a secular country, but I know it reflects the fact that the Queen is the head of the Church of England as well as the royal family. But I thought that was a really interesting thing that she said 70 years ago. The other point, I was interested people talking about these. John talked about the reserve powers, and then I think others talked about the power the government has, not even in those reserve powers, but to actually influence legislation as it goes through today. Because the Guardian published something last year that they'd taken from the National Archives that showed how the monarchy has influenced lots of bills over the years. If there's a bill, for example, to do with, inheritance or to do with land or whatever, where they've got a huge vested interest, they use that privilege they've got. And it's not a secret. It's actually part of the procedure. The Tories, when they were asked about it last year, the ministers said it's standard procedure for ministers to give an early draft of bills to the royal family. It's not a secret. It is part of the procedure. And so they use that opportunity, the monarchy, to make sure that those bills, anything that affects their own personal wealth, is actually altered. And there was even one of the bills the Guardian found, I think it was about rules about driving rules, safety rules on the road. And they wanted that changed because they wanted to be able to drive however they liked on their own estates. It isn't just these reserve powers. I think it's worth us saying that. So we could say to people, look, if there's a bill going through Parliament about benefits, they don't interview benefits representative groups about that policy. They go ahead and do it. But when it comes to things that affect the landed gentry, the establishment, etc., they do share it with them and get their views. And I think that's really important that we draw that out. And I know people say don't make a lot of fuss about it, but if someone talks to you about the establishment or about, there's this word at the moment, oligarchs, i.e. billionaires, why don't you point out that the royal family are billionaires? So in that sense, they're like these oligarchs. They own huge amounts of land. They're wealthy. How can you have an attitude that criticizes all billionaires except the royal family? They are part and parcel of that same wealthy elite that's the basis of the class society that we're in. So I think you can get opportunities to talk through these issues with working class people, not go on about it a long time, but there is plenty of points you can be raising with people about the role of the royal family.
And just to clarify a couple of points I raised earlier, really. I mean, I think following on from what you said, David, I think the important thing is it's a class question. I think it's a mistake to raise it as if society is okay, but let's have a go at the Queen. I mean, wealth is okay, but the Queen's too rich. If you're going to attack wealth, you need to attack capitalism, wealth, landed aristocracy, the whole idea of unequal distribution of wealth. You don't just go, oh, well, we're perfectly happy to have millionaires owning the country, but we got it in for this one particular family who we don't like. I know that's what people say, but that's how it can appear. If you, as John Pickard says, if you broach the issue in a very clumsy way, it can just be seen as kind of personal animosity against this glamorous sort of family, And I think it's a mistake to do that. I think we have to situate our attack on the monarchy in terms of the constitutional role they play and the role they play in class society. So when we're opposing capitalism, we oppose the monarchy as part of that, but we don't single out that particular thing as if changing it is going to change the world. You could abolish the monarchy tomorrow, we'd still be a capitalist country. When Norway is not a worse country in terms of democracy and equality than Italy or France or the USA. And I think we need to talk about replacing one system with another. The idea that capitalism's okay, provided you get rid of the monarchy, I think is a lot of what you might call liberal Republicans have this idea that if you have a Bill of Rights and a democratic, that somehow society will be okay. That if you have these democratic reforms, that will sort of make capitalism okay. So you need to attack all of their wealth, all of inequality. You need to go for true democracy. I mean, ultimately, of course, a workers' state, but you can't just come out and say you want a workers' state. That has to be sort of, you need to talk about how best to get that image across. But I think that's what I say. We situate our attack on the monarchy as part of the attack on class society, rather than saying, oh, I don't like this family, he's a nonce, she's stupid, don't like her. I think that doesn't it cuts through with a certain layer of working people, but the mass of working people it doesn't cut through to.
It's a case of strategy. Talking to people about politics, as I have for most of my life, the one you can never predict the outcome of the discussion is a one about the royal family, because people who have been strongly Labour voters in the past, at election times, you raise the issue of the Queen and the royal family and you lose them. And I like fighting arguments I can win. And I think there's a whole list of priorities that go beyond that. I mean, who do I want rid of most, Boris Johnson or the Queen? Well, at the moment, Boris Johnson. Who do I want rid of most, Boris Johnson or Rupert Murdoch? Rupert Murdoch. I think that if you win some arguments, it opens the door for new arguments. How about tackling the issue of hereditary peers and an elected second chamber as a priority? And once people understand that issue, I think then you've opened the door to talk about hereditary privilege. and all the things that go with it, and about the wealth that surrounds them, and the entitlements of all of these people that come through just being born who as they are. I think there is a whole list of democratic reforms, starting with the reform of the House of Lords, that I would say, if those arguments are won, open the door for new arguments, and you get a little bit nearer talking about the monarchy. But I think to start talking about the monarchy, in my experience with many working class people, it's been a non-starter. And I mean, the whole establishment, I think, is geared up to, as they have been, as the establishment have been up to in other arguments. I mean, I can see that already now. Prince Charles, who I don't think has been popular. He's not a popular prince. He's a bit of a joke to everybody, even people who support the monarchy. But just little things feeding in the press, like, for example, this week, how he described sending people to Rwanda as, an absolutely awful policy. Well, I don't think there's many people who would disagree with that. And I think that's part of the publicity campaign, the promotion of the royal family that's already started in preparation for changing around the way that people feel about him. And I think we're going to see more and more of that the nearer it gets to him taking over as king. So the whole establishment will work around it, and we won't win. The same way as the establishment moved against Jeremy Corbyn. Totally different scenario there that was built around him than actually was in real life. So I'd prefer to go for arguments I could win. And there's lots of democratic reforms. I mean, the 2017 Labour manifesto, the 2019 manifesto of the Labour Party contained loads of good stuff about democratic reforms. I'd rather go for that kind of stuff first, because I think by going down that road, you get closer to winning an argument about the monarchy. But from this point in time, I think we are years off that, and we've got to win these arguments first.